everyone, I'm Raider from the Sensible Initiative, and today I have another theory video for you all. Before we dive in, I have to say that there have been a few changes to the way this series is working. Due to time constraints, I am removing one of the parts. The piece I've chosen to remove wasn't really all that relevant to the overall theory, it was just something that fit in nicely. It was the part discussing my belief that neither Sora nor Kari are actually guardians of light. I may do this part at a later date, depending on what impact Melody of Memory actually has on the theory as a whole. With that out of the way, let's get into part 3. This time I'm taking a look at the Dark Inferno boss in Kingdom Hearts 3. I've seen theories that try to claim that Dark Inferno is Emperor's or Zigbar or Luxu's Heartless, but I don't agree. Looking at some of the attacks the boss uses and comparing them to other characters, whilst also keeping an idea of the previous parts of the overall theory, I have found some evidence to suggest that the Dark Inferno may actually be Sora's true Heartless. So let's dive into the darkness and see what we can find hidden in the shadows. I want to start with one particular feature of the Dark Inferno, its two swords. There aren't many dual-wielding characters in the Kingdom Hearts series, these being Xemnas, Zigbar, Sora, and Roxas. And that is pretty much it, unless you want to count the samurai nobodies that are present in Kingdom Hearts 2 and 358 over 2 days. Now, this doesn't exactly mean that it can't be the hardest of any other character in the series, but I would think that it would be more likely to be one of these four. Well, 3 of them anyway. Seeing as Xemnas is a Norse nobody and doesn't seem to have ever developed a heart of his own, I doubt that he would in fact produce a Heartless. Moving on from that, Zigbar uses arrow guns instead of a bladed weapon, but then again he is actually Luxu, but he has never been shown to use dual keyblades. This leaves us with only Sora and Roxas of the 4. This is where things start to get a little crazy. If you recall back to the first part of this little series, I mentioned how Sora may be travelling back in time each time he is defeated, the result being multiple copies of his own heart being present in his body. This would mean that he would be accumulating a massive amount of light and darkness within himself. However, the ratio of the two will remain constant. Putting this mathematically, let's say each copy of Sora's heart contains 99 units of light and 1 unit of darkness. If he were to have died roughly 300 times between the beginning of Kingdom Hearts 1 and the end of Kingdom Hearts 3, then that number would rise up to being 29,700 units of light compared to 300 units of darkness. The percentage ratio is the same, but the amount is much larger than before in both cases. This would provide an astronomically powerful Heartless upon Sora's final demise, something like Dark Inferno. However, this also links into Sora's anti or rage forms. As far as I am aware, these two forms are present in Kingdom Hearts 2 and 3 respectively, and are very powerful although risky forms that Sora has access to. In appearance, they are very similar to a shadow, except from form, and they are activated in a different way to the other forms in both games. In Kingdom Hearts 2, it is activated randomly when using any form other than Limit or Final, with the chances increasing with every drive form use, or by equipping the two to become one Keyblade. In Kingdom Hearts 3, the Situation command appears randomly after entering a low health state. You can choose whether or not to enter each form, suggesting that Sora has more control over it than he had previously. And those aren't the only changes. There is a significant increase in power in Kingdom Hearts 2 and 3, mainly in the form of Risk Charge, which changes your moveset and leads up to a powerful finishing move that allows you to exit the form early, but at the cost of health. This wasn't possible in Kingdom Hearts 2, and the only way to exit the form early was to change area, but either way you'd be left with a depleted drive gauge when reverting back to Sora's standard state. Then you also have to consider the fact that Rage form continues to wield the Keyblade that was active at the time of activating the form, while Anti-form cannot make use of Keyblades at all. This again makes it seem like Sora's Rage form is getting more powerful which would make sense if more darkness were accumulated within him over time. Let's talk about what the anti-enrage form actually are. I'm fairly certain that they are what Sora's Heartless would be as long as he still has his heart. Most powerful pureblood Heartless have large heart-shaped holes in their abdomen or chest region. This includes Dark Sides, Invisibles, the Dark Fawn, and of course the Dark Inferno. While weaker pureblood Heartless lack this trait, I would say that this is meant to signify the lack of a heart that is hard to possess, or due to the ratio of light to darkness that they used to possess. The two forms that Sora can use also lack this trait, but that could be for either reason. It could also be due to size. The shadows and Nova shadows are smaller than or roughly equal to the average person in height. They might not be physically large enough for the hole to be apparent. But then again, why would Sora's Heartless be a pureblood? And what does that even mean? Well, this was described in Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days. A pureblood Heartless is just made up of darkness, and that's it. The other variety of Heartless are the Emblem Heartless. These ones actually contain hearts. It is unclear what causes the creation of two different types, but I have an idea of what it could be. A pureblood Heartless could be the result of someone's heart contains more light than their own darkness can contain. Thus, the light of the heart escapes while the darkness takes the form of a pureblood Heartless. Emblem Heartless, therefore, is the result of someone whose heart has enough darkness to ensnare the light within it, producing a Heartless that contains a trapped heart. This explains why powerful pureblood Heartless are so rare, because the conditions required to produce them are unlikely. You would need a heart with a large amount of darkness, but not enough to trap the light it also contains. But Sora's accumulation of hearts might provide such a situation, as the percentage of darkness is minuscule, but the actual quantity is fairly large overall. So what other evidence is there? Let's take a look at one of my least favourite attacks that the Dark Inferno uses, the one where it cleaves at a large area. Does anyone else think this looks familiar? Maybe from a previous one-on-one fight with a dual-wielding opponent? Well, I certainly think so. And as it turns out, Roxas uses a very similar attack in Kingdom Hearts 2. He crosses his keyblades and attacks, dealing damage in an area around him. However, there are two distinctive differences between the two attacks. Roxas's can be blocked, whilst the Dark Inferno's must be dodged. And the Dark Inferno's attack can be interrupted or cancelled, while Roxas's cannot be. Doesn't that fit so nicely though? How Sora's Heartless and Nobody use a very similar attack, but have the opposite weakness in said attack? With that said, if the Dark Inferno is indeed Sora's true Heartless, then how did it end up in the Keyblade graveyard, and how was it possible that Sora couldn't fight against it? Well, I have already answered both of these to an extent. In part 1, I mentioned how maybe Sora's heart becomes the original Kingdom Hearts after he is defeated once and for all. But before he dies, I also suggested that he is sent back to the beginning, where there was only darkness. Here is where the pieces fit together. The darkness within his heart will be unable to contain the sheer quantity of light that also resides within him. Thus, his heart will be free to go somewhere, becoming the first light in darkness, the true Kingdom Hearts. His comparatively smaller amount of darkness would then be left to take a form that is unguided by a heart, resulting in the Dark Inferno being created with abilities and traits that are Sora. Hence the Dark Inferno exists at the same time as Kingdom Hearts 3 and could be Sora's true Heartless at the same time. Also, we know that Kingdom Hearts has resided above the Badlands for quite some time. It is possible that the Dark Inferno simply stays there in an attempt to one day regain what it has lost. This also explains why it only fights Sora, as it might be trying to capture his heart instead. However, this does leave one question hanging in the air. What about Sora's body? There is also the issue of how would Sora end up at the beginning of time? However, I believe the answer to both of these lies with none other than the Master of Masters. There we have it, part 3, done and dusted. This one was a lot of fun to make. It was meant to be a relatively short part, but it just exploded into details and stuff to talk about. And there is still more that I would love to talk about, but this video is already getting a bit longer than I would like. This part is also a bit of a bonus segment, as it isn't really necessary for the rest to make sense, but does close up some loose ends rather nicely. I really hope that you have been able to follow along with this one as well, as I put a lot of work into these videos, and it would be a shame if anything got garbled along the way. Not to mention, this one is a lot more speculation than the others have been. With that said, please feel free to comment down below and tell me what your thoughts and opinions are, as well as discussing with other viewers. Also, if you like the video, please leave a like. It really helps to motivate me, as it tells me I'm doing something right. But above all else, be sure to keep an eye out for part 4, in which I'll be taking a look into who and what exactly the Master of Masters is. Until then, I'm Raider, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.